Good evening. Welcome to the December 28th, 2020 meeting of the Grafton Planning Board. We're doing it by Zoom on account of the governor said to, more or less, sort of. And we'll do this the way, if you have any question about how to get recognized or any of that, Chris is following Q&A and chat. So you can go there. I'm not sure whether you can do raise hand. No, I don't see raise hand offhand. Whatever. Down here, I found raise hand down here. Amazing. Okay, a couple more people arrived. All right. Let's see. First, I'll go down the roll, and then maybe Chris will pick up on the rest. Dave.
Here.
Justin.
Here.
Linda.
Here.
Prabhu.
Here.
And I am here. And Vikram sent a message. I think he said he wasn't calling. He wasn't going to be able to get here. Okay, Chris.
We also have Natalia Allward staff.
That's it.
Stephen Benincasa.
Here.
Julie Benincasa.
You're muted.
Here.
And James Tatro.
James. You unmute and say hi. Are you there? He may not be there. Okay, first item of business, public input. This is when we let the public talk to us about things that aren't otherwise on the agenda. Is there any public input? There being not a whole lot of public. I think we do not have any public input. That lets us move on to the decisions, draft decisions. Scenic road permit, 88 Adams Road.
Sorry, I'm seeing James Tatro did mention that he needs a phone number to call in. So let me just see if I can get him on the call shortly. Thank you, Justin.
Maybe this is him.
Hello?
Hello?
Sorry about that delay.
If you can get any more volume, it'd be good. Anyway, that's James Tetro. Scenic road permit, SRP 2020-02. There's a draft decision.
Yeah, sorry, there's just a little bit of feedback. Let me just.
I think the feedback's gone.
Okay.
So Was there any changes that came in, Chris, to the second revision since it got sent around to us in email?
No, so so James Tatro did provide some edits, and I did include those into the decision, the draft decision for the meeting tonight, which I'll pull up now. So I did have I did include some of the highlighted kind of discussion for the board to consider. Most of it's fairly standard. But we do have the findings and the comment of the removal of the 24-inch oak. So the board, in discussing, they wanted to include that the 24-inch oak tree would remain, and this would just be for the removal of the 2 ash trees. So I did kind of clarify that in the findings, and as well as the conditions of the decision. But beyond that, there were no changes.
Yeah. No, as I read through it, each of the findings repeats proposed tree removal would accommodate sightlines for proposed, so on. But we don't also note, or maybe we should be noting where the board felt that there were factors on the other side too. Would it, finding 2, would it adversely affect the historical values, seen aesthetic and scenic, upon which the law is based? And I think in there, we should be noting, I'm pretty sure that everyone agreed, most everyone agreed that it would harm those values.
Yeah, I think maybe the finding 2 there should perhaps read more along the lines of the board found that the removal of the 2 ash trees would not adversely affect the values on which the road designation was originally based, but that the removal of the 24-inch oak would adversely affect those values.
Yes, exactly.
To just read into these, the lines the application does or does not satisfy was feeling like it should be answered no for most of them as I was reading, just because it didn't designate between the 24-inch oak and the ash. However, the finding 8 did make that distinction, but it was not clear in the earlier finding that was the case.
Yeah, in fact, it's not clear to me that the wording regarding the applicant does or does not satisfy the requirement. That strikes me as it doesn't quite fit. I think a statement along the lines that I just suggested is probably a sufficiently complete replacement for that second sentence of finding 2.
So, so along the lines, I mean, does the board want to remove the entire, whether or not the, essentially remain silent on whether or not the application satisfies the requirement, and just include that the removal of the 2 ash trees would not affect the historical and aesthetic values, but the removal of the 24-inch oak would? Is that what I'm?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that's a pretty accurate statement of what the board found with respect to 6A there.
Okay, we have that one under control. Move on to number 3. Consider the necessity for the proposed action. I would say that we didn't feel that we had evidence to demonstrate that the removal of the trees was necessary.
At this time.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, on that particular point, I think in the board sentiment of the board was that is the case with regard to the 24-inch oak, but the other 2 trees are actually within the right of way of the proposed road, Libby Lane. Just wanted
Yeah.
to make that distinction between the 2 ash trees and the 24-inch oak.
I don't think that I felt we had evidence to support any of them on public safety, welfare, or convenience. If the traffic engineer had said something, for example, that would be a basis. Anybody else?
I thought I had something. I'm just looking up the notes I have here. One second. If anyone else wants to talk, go ahead. While I look.
Didn't make out that.
If I may go. So I only recollect discussion primarily being focused on that oak tree. I don't know if he spoke about the in-depth other the ash trees to be removed or not, if there was evidence. I don't recollect that part.
I'm not sure what you were saying. You don't recollect.
I recollect that we did discuss in detail regarding the oak tree, whether it was necessary or not. Was there any evidence to state if it had to be removed or not and stuff? But I don't recollect if he had that level of discussion about the other 2 ash trees.
Yeah, I don't think that we had anything particularly presented. If any of the trees, well, the other ones block vision less, I think, than the 24-inch.
Yeah, I think for finding 3, we're looking at least for my sake, a little bit of the safety, but not for sightline reasons. And that is more for the fact that the trees are weak species susceptible to pest infestation and disease, as quoted from our DPW Exhibit 3, I believe it is. And for that reason, the DPW recommended them to be removed as well for the ash.
Well, I think they asked for it. That, but, okay.
That is a little different than saying that they are actively dying or having an infestation or decaying, which to my knowledge they are not. But that is, it was still recommended.
Yeah. Maybe we can cite that DPW recommended that they be removed.
And use the language from item 4 that cites that the DPW recommended the removal of ash trees.
Mhm. Okay. Okay. Anybody have any problems with number 4? It read just slightly odd to me, but it's not enough so to need a change. It just, the flow of the 24-inch oak at 8,000 and the removal. Those are like two different, one of them is, yeah, that take the tree or don't take the tree. The other is more like, if you take the tree, give us $8,000, or we should get compensation for the value. I'm not sure whether any of that needs to be changed. Does anybody have any concern?
I guess it does read a little bit odd, and maybe it's okay to leave the language as is, but the topic of finding four there is the availability of reasonable alternatives to the proposed action. And again, the proposed action is the removal of 3 different trees. There really aren't any alternatives other than not removing the trees.
Right. Don't remove them.
Yeah. So there really are, in terms of achieving the objectives of the applicant, there really were no reasonable alternatives to the proposed actions other than simply not removing the trees.
Yeah, I think that's probably most of what we should say there. Can we do that, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the challenge of writing these is that, I do have to write them ambiguously, that it's, even though the board may have indicated some of their inclinations, like, I'm trying to write them as very
Yeah,
not one way or the other.
these are always, when we've got something like this, it's really, really hard. Imagine that there are better ways to get there, but how about what I said here? And what Dave said, I think it was Dave. Okay? You got it?
Yeah.
Number 5. I don't think that the yellow number 5 really, I'm not sure that belongs.
So I guess to expand on it in terms of the environmental and historical values, it's really kind of looking at using the existing gap in the stone wall, and then the purpose of the tree removal is really to accommodate the sight lines. So again, trying to write it fairly ambiguously, that's where I could definitely go on about potential other environmental and historical values that would be impacted, but I think those were the concise ones.
Consider whether the proposed action compromise other environmental or historical values, other than which? The ones we talked about somewhere back before.
Well, that's just a direct quote from the scenic road bylaw.
Would compromise or harm other environmental.
What the intent. So, other environmental or historical values presumably is a contrast with the scenic, aesthetic, and historical values upon which the scenic road designation was originally based. So D here is sort of a catch-all, other things besides what's directly protected by the scenic road bylaw.
Yeah, I think maybe we can just say we found no other environmental or historical values that would be compromised.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Bob.
Okay, Chris? Okay. Number 6.
Yeah, now here, again, it's compensatory actions proposed by the applicant, and there were none. if memory serves.
Well,
The DPW did recommend a compensatory action.
I'm not sure, Dave, whether 6C, I guess, no, 6E includes compensatory actions that we suggested.
Right, that's why I started out saying it. It says that the applicant proposed none. And in the context of compensatory actions, DPW did propose one, but and somewhere that should be noted in the findings.
But the way I could write it is I could say I could leave the Department of Public Works assess the value replacement value of the 24-inch oak at 8,000, and recommended the removal of the ash trees. The applicant declined to provide such compensatory relief, and in the findings of the board, it was found more beneficial to have the 24-inch oak remain.
Okay,
Because I think that was kind of the extent of the discussion in terms of the
Okay.
oak tree.
okay, everybody?
Should we have the included in this one, since it's talking about compensatory action, the ash trees at no compensation? Something along those lines where they're explicitly calling out the ash are not, are recommended and we don't need a compensation for it. A DPW's recommendation.
Yeah,
I can clarify that. Yep.
okay. Now that was
Finding 6.
6. 7, consider the consistency. I'm thinking that's going to be is not acceptable. Anybody disagree?
Bob,
I'm
can you
trying-
clarify? Sorry.
Go ahead, Prabhu.
Bob, I was wondering, can you clarify what do you mean by not acceptable? What was your thought?
Town plans and policies, I think, it's more or less, to me, is again what the scenic road bylaw is about. And I think concluded that it's not what they want to do is not acceptable.
Is that in
No,
terms
no.
of the 24-inch oak, or is that in terms of the ash trees as well?
No, just the.
Well, certainly with respect to the oak, and I don't know what the town's policies and plans are for nuisance trees in the right of way. But maybe because DPW asked for them, we could say that the ash trees are acceptable.
Yeah, I think in part this gets to whether the proposed work is consistent with things other than the scenic road bylaw. There could be a question of consistency with the comprehensive master plan, a question of consistency with the open space and recreation plan, with the shade tree bylaw, which is probably something that is sort of included in the scope here, but it's relevant. Just in general, other plans and policies might maybe not so much for this particular application, but in other applications, there might be some additional considerations or concerns relative to some of these other plans and bylaws. And off the top of my head, I don't know the extent to which the shade tree bylaw needs to be brought into consideration here, but I think it was Justin who suggested that the DPW recommendation kind of implies that, you know, with respect to the 2 ash trees, it's not inconsistent with the shade tree bylaw. And I think we've beat the 24-inch oak just about to death on this.
I hope not. $600, come on.
Yes, poor choice of phrasing there, I think.
So I think in terms of crafting the specific language, I think it might be beneficial to look in the context of if the board is more inclined to go with, and that's right. I mean, I think from my recollection, the board was inclined to potentially either approve with the condition that the 24-inch oak is to remain, or to deny outright if the ash trees were to be included. And I think that, I think that would help in crafting this language, when we talk about the proposed plans and policy, or the adopted plans and policies. I think as the discussions went, it does apply to, wouldn't be acceptable for the oak, but would be acceptable for the ash.
Well, our decision should just be, we approve 2 of the trees and we don't approve the other tree.
I think that's where we were headed with this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just, here it's a matter of writing the findings to support the board's ultimate decision. Or in other words, put it, make sure that the decision the board makes is consistent with the findings the board makes.
Yeah. Now, are we going to try to get this crafted tonight, or are we going to come back at the next meeting with updated language?
We could, in my mind, we could vote to approve, but explicitly leaving out the findings as a vote, and vote on the reworded of the findings next week if we wanted to. That's a little bit hairy, but it's
Arguably, voting on the decision before deciding on the findings is putting the cart before the horse.
Yeah, that's problematic in this situation. So next time,
I think it depends upon the board's willingness, depending upon if they're willing to give discretion to have the findings administratively adjusted as discussed tonight. I have the notes and the recording. I'm happy to craft the findings as found, but again, it's difficult to craft the findings for the meeting one way or the other without the board's indication of the final approval.
well,
we could always have it before I can craft the.
let me ask, do any of the members disagree with the decision coming out, permit the 2 ashes and don't permit the 24-inch tree?
No,
If no one objects, then I think Chris knows. Okay.
And if we don't want to put this off for another 2 weeks and vote on it, then what we've occasionally done is left it up to one member of the board to sort of give a final review of the revised language.
Are you volunteering, Dave?
Well, I will admit that I've done that a time or 2 before.
Yeah.
If it's the board's pleasure to have someone from the board review the language after Chris has finished updating it, I could do that, or the chair could do it if the chair wants to do it, or anybody else.
I think I heard you volunteer, Dave. You've been doing a lot of good work lately. Like this.
That's what I get for opening my mouth some days.
Yeah. You want to make motion along something, a line like that?
I guess I'll make it.
Okay,
I move that we find favorably on this decision with the condition of excluding the 24-inch oak from being removed, and having Dave Robbins, our vice chair, give a final approval of the findings as we discussed.
Second.
it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
And we won't demand that Chris have us the revised decision by the close of business tomorrow.
I'm off tomorrow, so it'll be Wednesday.
That's why I'm suggesting. we're not
Put that in the
gonna
motion, and, no. Okay, any discussion?
I had one point.
Thing in Q&A. Oh, Robert Aberg has arrived apparently. Can you clarify the ash tree, quote, nuisance, unquote, determination?
Ash.
They are ash. They are not a nuisance that I am aware of. In fact, the state is working to preserve them against emerald ash borers and a blight.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just reading about ash being an endangered species because of this borer. It's a review of different kinds of wood, and ash is wonderful, except it's got this problem. But does that make any difference to anybody?
I would say that my recollection of our discussion is the ash is not a nuisance, and it was the DPWs said that the ash is a weak species and susceptible to pest infestation and disease. So I don't believe we used the word nuisance. If we did, if I did, I would apologize because that wasn't my intent.
Yeah, it's probably best to quote the DPW director who writes that the ash, in his opinion, is a weak species, except he spelled it weak as in 7-day week, not weak as in the opposite of strong. I'm assuming he meant weak as in the opposite of strong. A weak species and susceptible to pest infestation and disease. He would support and recommend its removal. It is of no value to the town. This is the opinion of the DPW director, who may also be acting as the tree warden in the context of the shade tree bylaw, to the extent that that may apply. But I guess, the bottom line is the DPW director felt that that the two ash trees are not not in the same class as the 24-inch oak when it comes to the values protected by the scenic roads bylaw.
He says, thanks. Yes, Paul C is the tree warden. Does that change anything that people want to do here? You want to still say, okay, take the ash? Ashes. Yay or nay?
Yes.
Yes.
I hear you.
Yeah. Am I remembering correctly that it was that the ash trees are in the proposed right of way for the subdivision road?
Correct, and I think that was more the recommendation, that the value of the ash trees does not, in the DPW director's opinion, would not outweigh the safety benefits of line of sight and right away.
Yeah, so I just want to think we should probably be clear in our findings that the position of those trees relative to the proposed roadway makes it outweighs any value the trees have as scenic trees.
Is that okay, everybody?
Yes.
Still getting comments over here from, okay. Well, okay. Is that all the guidance you need, Chris?
It's,
You
yep,
take a vote. We need to take a vote, right?
We're
Well,
going to discuss, right? I had one question.
yes,
So just in your motion, we were excluding it was a non-removal of the oak. Should we call
Yes.
out the removal of the ash? That was not called out in the motion. Should we do that, or that is included in the findings?
My intent was that it was included as part of approving the overall decision.
Okay, and is that included in the finding? Is that the assumption? That the findings, one of the findings clearly calls out that the two
Dave,
ash
to make sure it does.
Yes.
Dave,
Yeah, so, and I did include in finding 8, I included that the board found that the removal of the 24-inch oak to be provided and not the ash trees. And I think I did condition number 2 of the proposed decision. The work authorized by this decision shall include removal of the 2 identified ash trees. The 24-inch oak tree as identified in Exhibit 1E shall remain in accordance with finding 8.
I would have put in an only. Only authorizes the removal.
Noted.
Is everybody happy?
Yes. Sort
Voting. Dave,
Aye.
Justin,
Aye.
Linda,
Aye.
Prabhu,
Aye.
and I vote aye. Motion carries. Go for it. Time to move on. Let's see. All right. It's hearing time. 11 Wheeler Road, definitive plan. Where are we? Chris, I think you had some input.
Yep. So for that, I was able to, and I apologize, it was just the end of the day today that I was able to get that draft decision emailed out to members of the board and included in the meeting materials today. In writing that decision, I did go back in the exhibits and noted that the Graves Engineering review letter that the board typically looks for a final sign off from Graves. There were some outstanding comments. So I don't know if the applicant would like to kind of discuss those. I think the board could, review those comments tonight and see if there's things that can be done administratively, or if they want to have that final sign off from Graves. I know that's typically their policy. But that was one of the things that was noticed as I was writing the draft decision. So, and I see the applicant, Mr. Lino, is here as well.
Mr. Chairman, if I may answer Mr. McGoldrick's question. Again, for the record, Eli Lano from Mayor Antonellis, Jackowitz, and Haranis. I'm joined tonight by the applicants, Stan and Lisa McGriff, and then also by Jude Galvin from Andrews Engineering. I think it probably makes the most sense for me to quiet up and let Jude take the reins for a little bit here.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Jude Galvin from Andrews Engineering. I've been brought on to kind of close this project out. The person who was working on it had left, and I've been looking at the last few hearings, and we received a letter from Graves, which I read, and I reviewed the project, and we are in the process of revising the plans according to the Graves letter. We don't have any issues with anything that they said. Probably 85 to even 90% of the stuff is kind of cleanup and administrative, basically cleaning up the plans and showing the bounds where they are. For instance, some of the slope on the road was in question. The plans are almost done. I haven't got them quite done yet for tonight's meeting because of the holidays and just being very busy with the other projects that I've inherited over the past month or so. But there's a few things that have just taken a little bit longer than the other ones. There was a lot of quick ones we could knock off, but for the most part, I don't see any problem with us addressing all of the comments that Graves has on this letter. And like I said, we don't disagree or dispute any of them. They're just more just moving, water mains over a few feet and things like that. They're no showstoppers, I guess is the point.
I guess we would ask if the board had any comments on any of the specifics there. If there's anything that, while Jude is here, we might be able to address.
I don't know. Anybody else? I don't think that we do.
No,
Um,
I'm not an engineer.
Hey, Jim, I'm not an engineer. But I think we do want to have the plan updated and okayed by our engineer. I prefer to do that than
Yeah, I do.
the administrative path.
Yeah, it is preferable that we get all of the relevant documents in our exhibit list before we close the hearing. Because really, once we close the hearing, basically the record then becomes closed with occasionally we've had to try to work around that, but unless there's a compelling reason to close the hearing, I'm sure the board would generally prefer to leave it open until all of the documents have been finalized.
If that's the board's preference and policy, I don't know that we have a compelling reason. We've obviously come to enough meetings here that I don't think one more is going to be a big issue for the applicant. Is that all right, Stan and Lisa?
Of course. Yeah, in this case, we're talking 2 weeks, so it's not a lot of time. And it sounds, Jude, it sounds like that there shouldn't be any difficulty in getting revised plans done.
No, we're about a day away from getting the final plan, so we can make that.
Yeah, this holiday week is typically a slow week for getting work done.
Well, there's no one around calling me, so it's easy. It's good for me.
Tell
Yes,
my
it does have
boss,
a-
Attorney Antonellis is all over me.
Do we think we would get a response back from Graves before our next meeting on the 11th?
Yeah, once we have the revised plans, Jude, I think you have his contact. Usually you can just send the plans right over to him, and they're pretty quick to respond, but I'll follow up with Graves as well to.
I just, in a different town, there was a letter that I just did with Graves, and they came back real quick when it was just yes, yes, yes type of deal. So
Right.
Wonderful.
Okay, so are you requesting a continuation to the next meeting?
If I could take a few more minutes of the board's time, I just would like to discuss Attorney Kramer's correspondence that I had and ask if the board had also seen that and if that was enough information about accepting, I guess it's a donation or whatever, the contribution that the McGriffs are prepared to put up here. That's exhibit 17, I believe, if you might be able to screen share. It's short.
Yep. Yeah, so it was included in the meeting materials, and part of the discussion, I think, was around the board was questioning whether or not the Grafton Land Trust could accept a donation of the funding, and town council essentially nodded that is typical in the course of these types of projects, and they saw no issue with funding going to the Grafton Land Trust.
And then, not to contradict anything that Chris has said on that, they also said that, Rob Aberg, who was on the previous meeting minutes, I think he's probably around, also did provide several options of land that the town owns that's controlled by the Conservation Commission as well. And our position here remains that whatever the town thinks the best use for that $13,000 to offset the waiver, we will defer to the town on that and hope it comes out as something beautiful that people can use for the public benefit.
My only comment on that so far is my reading of what Attorney Kramer sent does not call out the Grafton Land Trust as acceptable as a town entity. Though my opinion, as I discussed in the past meeting, is that it should qualify as well anyway. But and Attorney Kramer's words could be used, could mean both. It could mean that it is acceptable because of what was sent to her and her response, but it doesn't call it out explicitly. So that's my only commentary there. I would be personally comfortable moving forward with the the donation or contribution, however we want to word it, put either the land trust or the conservation commission on those lines for this purpose.
My sense on that matter, if I may, I agree with you and Mr. Wood on your reading of Attorney Kramer's writing there, where it doesn't necessarily say that we can specifically give money to the land trust. And I would tend to think that if that money were directed to the town first to be directed to the land trust, I just in general think that that creates a bit of a better paper trail of the accounting on all of this, just to make sure that it ends up in the project that the town sees fit. But again, if the town directs us to go directly through the land trust, we certainly defer on that matter.
How, if it comes to the town, what mechanism then decides on its distribution? This gets beyond planning board decision rules and gets into finance rules. And we're going to continue this to the next time, right? So why don't we ask Ginny?
Okay.
And I can
Ask Ginny how to formulate this, assuming that she has a satisfactory.
And I can try to follow up with accounting as well to see if that's a specific account set up. I don't believe then it would need to go to town meeting, but it may. I'll clarify that with accounting to see what their process is for.
It might be actually town administrator's role. Isn't he the chief financial officer? I don't know. Given our current situation, it's a little different, but that would be a base to be sure.
Yeah, so I think we still have some moving pieces to figure out at town hall, because I don't know that select board doesn't have to sign off on that either or something. So that if we can speak with Attorney Kramer and give her a little bit more of the specific questions here so that we all know the roadmap here, I think it's probably our best option as we work with the town to make sure that this all gets to the right people and places.
Yeah, and I think one of the considerations has to be for what purpose is this donation intended? I mean, a donation, if it's just to the town with no specific purpose in mind, it likely goes into the town's general fund, which is probably not what we are really thinking about here. We're thinking of a donation that would be in support of something, whether it would go to a conservation fund or recreation fund. I mean, the idea behind this is sort of a substitute for improving the trails on the land trust property, and to that end, it should be probably directed to some at least roughly comparable purpose within the town. Probably you want to make it not overly specific, but I don't know off the top of my head, what particular funds or accounts are appropriate for this, for what you're trying to accomplish here. So that is something that needs some further investigation. I mean, Attorney Kramer has given us sort of a top level. Yeah, there's no problem with accepting a donation. Now we want to figure out the mechanics of it and spell it out in the decision in just enough detail to make sure that it does get done and that the board can take that into consideration in the context of the overall final decision. And so obviously we don't have enough information tonight to nail that down.
No, but it should be pretty easy to solve because you can give money, for instance, to the library and it goes to the library. There's a fund that is donations, so it's possible.
Okay.
That's the issue, whether, I think,
There's
as
a
much as
fund.
I know, I think you have to have a fund. We have the cable, the fund that the cable money goes into, special fund, which is with restricted disbursements. But I'm not sure whether town meeting had to set the fund up or whether just accounting can do it. So Chris will uncover all of that.
And I also wonder if conservation might have some sort of a fund for their general operations that might make sense if we end up having this money go toward trail repair in one of the several locations that Mr. Aberg pointed out that they control, that the town owns.
I'm almost certain that the town has, or at least used to have, a conservation fund that was generally used by Conservation Commission for such purposes. I presume such a fund still exists, but I just don't happen to know off the top of my head.
I think if we can have a fund, this money to be dispersed under the direction of the planning board would be the best plan, because we're the ones that are dealing with the problem and the trade-off for public benefit. So, is that a request to the next meeting?
Yes, it is, Mr. Chairman.
Do I hear a motion?
I move that we continue this hearing until our next meeting, which is January 11th at 7:30 p.m.
Based
Second.
on forthcoming written,
based on forthcoming written requests to continue.
Second.
seconded by Prabhu. Any discussion? Hearing none. Dave,
Aye.
Justin,
Aye.
Linda,
Aye.
Prabhu,
Aye.
I vote aye. Motion carries. We'll see
Thank you all, and Natalia, I will get you a letter shortly, and have a good New Year, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
You too.
Thank you.
Have a good evening, members of the board. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I think that brings us back to decisions, action items. Request for definitive plan approval at 88 Adams Road. How are we doing on that?
So similarly for this one, I was able to draft a decision for the board. Again, there were some slight revisions that came about today. I believe the uploaded to the project materials is the revised, but that included some comments, some typos noted by James Tatro. So I did include those. I had no issues with his comments in regards to the typos, and thank him for including those. I will pull up the draft decision. So I included the findings, the exhibits as they were submitted for waivers. So I did include a finding in terms of what I think was some of the significant discussion in terms of the sloped granite versus vertical granite and Cape Cod berm. And I noted DPW expressed no preference with regards to the proposed slope granite proposed throughout. Conditions, I reviewed the conditions of the MRSP 2016-4 that this is based out of, kind of ran through those conditions. I do have to include the registry book and page from the previous decision.
One was condition 14.
So condition 14 was in relation to the 2-year lapse. So I didn't include any commentary on that. We could either remove it if the board would like to remain silent, or we could include commentary at the board's discretion. And then if they wanted to include discussion in terms of the waivers, I left placeholders for that as well.
Okay. Condition 14, I tried.
I can pull up the previous decision if that's beneficial.
Condition, excuse me, condition 14 in the MRSP stated that it lapses within 2 years from the date of the expiration of the appeal period. And that was back in 2016.
Wasn't there some tolling though?
Okay, so the decision was dated like April of 17. Yeah, that normally would have expired in or somewhere around the middle of 2019. And I don't remember whether we extended the MRSP.
But Chris, didn't that there was tolling for some of our dates?
Yeah. So the pretty much every decision as part of the conditions includes a 2-year lapse. That's all decisions that the planning board issues as a standard from their subdivision rules and regs, I believe it is. And so the planning board does have the authority to extend that at their discretion. I haven't been able to review yet where this stands in terms of that 2-year and whether or not it was extended, but the board does have the discretion to extend that decision deadline.
Remind me, what does it mean if with this application, if that decision was never extended?
So procedurally, it would have lapsed. It is my understanding is it's a local ordinance, or it's a local regulation in terms of our rules and regulations. It's not state mandated. So where that falls procedurally, I think the board has some discretion in terms of allowing it to move forward anyways. But technically it would have lapsed if it hadn't been extended. But I think that's more of a local procedural matter. My understanding, the board typically has the 2-year extension in order to continue to have applicants come before the board and give updates on the status of the project, more so than to end any previously done work.
Yeah, and I don't recall off the top of my head whether the expiration of a major residential special permit has any impact on the filing of a definitive subdivision plan. It seems like it ought to, but as you point out, Chris, this major residential special permit is a local invention, not unique to Grafton. I'm pretty sure I've seen that in other towns. But nevertheless, the relationship between the MRSP and the definitive subdivision plan is kind of unique, and I don't know off the top of my head what our zoning bylaw says about the validity of a definitive permit filed after the corresponding MRSP has expired.
You have to have implemented, what's the right word? Implemented the special permit, or started implementing the special permit before it expires, be that at 2 years or at some date after the 2 years that we give extensions to. If we didn't give an extension, it's expired, they don't have a special permit, they can't use the land the way this, the only way you can use that land for a major residential special permit, or a major, the only way you can use that land for a major subdivision is major residential subdivision, is if you have a special permit from the planning board. And that now, has it been exercised? But be much better to figure out. I thought that some of this, for the last while, the state has been doing, the state put out a bunch of stuff a couple of years ago about tolling dates on decisions and permits and whatnot, letting them extend. I've forgotten exactly where that all started, but it was what, 3 years ago or something like that. And it comes up from time to time when we talk about whether an extension is needed. And that would, if we could, I've heard about that many times at our meetings. And I don't know exactly where to look for exactly what is and isn't told.
Yes, I would note, and Natalia, thank you for pointing out in the comments, this hasn't been an inactive application. They have been seeking definitive plan approval in 2018, 2019, and also now in 2020. So they have been before the board a number of times.
Right, but does that satisfy the, I think maybe it says exercised.
I'd have to look back.
That's always the, when has the special permit been exercised? And you have to have shovels in the ground or whatever. So I think that there's an open question there. What else do we need to worry about?
I'll pull up the draft decision again. I mean, I think beyond that, I think in terms of if any of the language was amenable to the board, or if they had comments on the language that was included, I'm happy to look at that, but I'll pull up the decision again.
I'm really not sure what we're looking for here. Board review of waiver request under each of these.
My only concern with the waiver request is I don't recall reading much of anything in the findings to support or deny any of the waivers in this decision.
I think typically in the decision like this, there may be some findings to support the waiver request, but very often it's under the, each waiver, there is some discussion about the board's reason for granting the waiver.
Yeah, but waiver 2, for example, doesn't have much.
So we could look back at the, in terms of the waiver, specific waiver requests, we could look back at the applicants' requested waivers and their narrative in terms of those waivers, and the board could either accept that and include that as their discussion of the waiver request, they could remain silent and simply approve the waiver, or if they have further discussion, we could include that.
Okay, how are we gonna do that? Are we gonna do that? We're gonna try to do that right now and right here, or what?
I'll say my recollection on waiver 2 just specifically was that the applicant during this hearing did discuss, why they were doing that, in terms of there's just to maintain reasonable degrees on the road, so to speak, slope, that they needed to do more cutting and filling than our was typically allow. That was my memory here. But I think we have enough to fill out that it doesn't make a ton of sense to do it during this live meeting. That's my intuition.
Yeah, I think with a number of these waiver requests, it's probably sufficient for the decision to refer back to a particular exhibit in which the applicant documents their justification for the waiver request, and the board can basically say that we agree with the applicant's reasoning and grant the waiver accordingly. There may be some cases where we need to have a finding, for example, the finding that Chris put in regarding vertical versus sloped granite, that is really feeds into that particular waiver. So there's a reference back to the finding. In other cases, a reference back to the applicant's submission included in the exhibit list would be sufficient. There may be cases where we have to do some more wordsmithing.
I think I'd kind of like to see here for each of the waivers a brief statement of what the presentation was. For example, there was a reason for the tree, not having the tree plan. There was a reason for not having the soil survey and percolation test. And maybe this ought to say, as see documentation, so and so, or be applicant asked for this represented that such and such was the case. Okay.
Having had to look back on a few decisions that were before my time on the board, having reasons in the decision, even if it is a quote from what the applicant put, and a notation that it was in exhibit whatever 3, that whatever it really is useful, just because then if I have to look at the decision, I don't have to then also pull 4 or 5 exhibits just to see the reason. I can at least see the reason why.
Yeah.
And it helps things going forward.
Yes. I think it helps because we'd like to be clear about what considerations and circumstances brought us to give a waiver in this case to that requirement. So that when somebody else wants a waiver, a similar waiver in the future, we have it documented what the board's thinking was. What we just talked about with the trees, actually seeing making a balance and deciding this was okay and that wasn't because blah blah blah.
Yeah, I just pulled up an example decision from last year, just to look at how we formatted the waivers back then. And that case, and this was one where the waivers I think were voted individually, but basically we would state for each waiver we state that at the meeting of such and such a time, after due consideration, blah blah blah, the board voted to approve or deny the waiver, followed by quoting the section, followed by a short paragraph summarizing the applicant's request, followed by a paragraph with what the board found relative to that. So it's like in that particular, that's just one example, but that's the that's a format where we kind of encapsulated the vote, just a reminder of what the requirement was, a summary of the applicant's request, and a summary of what the board found relative to that.
Yes, that's very good. Can we give that as direction to Chris to flesh these out for us?
Well, so I mean, I think in terms of the draft decision, I did include the specific language from each of the waiver requests to the what was included. And I left blank sections for if the board does want to elaborate on each of the waivers in their discussion. But the board hasn't had that specific discussion specifically to the waivers at this point, so I haven't included anything.
Yeah, so let me point out just another example I found, which is quite different in terms of the verbosity. This one has a single paragraph indicating that the board voted to grant all of the following waivers. And then for each waiver, it referenced the rules and regulations section and title, followed by the board's finding. The board noted that there will be no daily traffic associated with the site once construction is complete. The board noted that the waiver was based on the scope of the project as well as the absence of specific concerns during the public hearing. So there again, with much more brevity, the board did state the reasons for granting the waiver.
I think for a number of these waivers that we did hear arguments to support them. I don't know whether it was only verbal or whether it was also written, but we did have input, and we really want to remember
Yeah, so certainly our decision should document the reasoning, the reasons why the board chose to grant or deny a waiver.
Yes.
In one format or another.
Okay. I think we're going to need some research and pull something together on that.
Yeah.
Looking back.
I think everything we need is on record somewhere.
Yeah. Well, it would be on the video recordings if nothing else.
If nothing else, yes.
Yes. Shall we postpone action on this until next time?
Is there anything else you feel you might need from us, Chris?
I mean, I guess I'll look back and try to craft decisions in terms of the board's discussion of the waivers. But beyond that, if there's anything else that the board would like me to include edits to the draft decision in the meantime, I know the applicant is eager to get along in this process, so that would be my request.
Anybody have anything?
No, I think at this point the two major points that we've covered for which we need more time to be spent. One is the question of the expiration of the major residential special permit, and the other is drafting the waiver language such that it shows the basis for the board's decision on the waivers. We haven't taken a formal vote on the waivers. It's my sense that the board is probably gonna, from the discussions that I can remember, I think the board is likely to be voting in favor of the waivers, but until we actually sit down with each one of them, preferably with enough information in front of us so that we can make an informed vote. We don't really know for sure.
Yeah. I think that for most of those, a reason was presented that seemed to be adequate to us so that nobody had very much discussion about it.
Right.
But what we heard in this case is adequate to get it waived. But that doesn't necessarily mean we waive it unless we heard that way. You know, in another case, we want to be able to separate by having noted. There's a specific thing about the road slope, I think, wasn't there? About what that balanced against and that sort of thing. And we want to just have those so that we see what's particular about our decision. Everybody happy with that?
Yeah. So
Sort of.
Yeah.
Sort of, yes. All right. I don't know that we need to vote anything at this point. Put it on the next agenda. Okay,
Sounds like a plan.
so ordered. Which brings us to the notice of intent to sell chapter 61A at 59 Pleasant Street. Our recommendation on the 61A. I think that we heard that Concom had recommended asking for the town to exercise the option and had various reasons why it felt that way. I don't know that anybody had any objection or any thought either way other than that.
Yeah, the reason this got put off, from my memory as well, was we were not sure if this was even a valid
Yes,
61A withdrawal request.
right. And I don't know whether we know that.
So yeah, we did coordinate with town council and in that discussion, she noted that the nuance of the residential language within the permit and whether or not that made the application deficient. Her indication, Jenny Kramer's indication, was that to pursue that may be more detrimental to the town in chasing a nuance rather than going through the Chapter 61A process and just proceeding as normal. So that the expiration for us to note the application as deficient has passed. And so I would just recommend that the board proceed with the 61A process. So that would be either a recommendation similar to the Concom's, echoing that to the select board. The board could remain silent or could propose a recommendation otherwise.
I think we could endorse, reference and endorse the Concom recommendation. Maybe noting the open question about assuming that this application is a proper one, then we recommend.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion.
I'll just note for the records, and this is consistent with Concom's position they've taken, is that this particular piece of property abuts 3 parcels of existing open space and would be, it would appear to be a good candidate for adding to some existing contiguous open space.
Yes, that's good. I think we can recite some of that in our, as the Concom has noted, blah, blah, blah.
And I'll further note, and this is probably something that the board could include in their memo, that acquisition of this would be consistent with the town's open space and recreation plan.
One or the old one?
The
The new one.
The new one, right?
Yeah.
I
We all
I
want-
agree with that inclusion.
Okay. So did somebody move?
Yes,
Somebody,
Wilson moved.
and it's been seconded.
and it's been seconded. That was so long ago. Um, Ready to vote?
Yes,
Dave,
Aye.
Justin,
Aye.
Linda,
aye.
Prabhu.
Aye.
I vote aye. Motion carries. All right. Now then. Do we have anything on the discussion items?
I don't have anything for the mill
Okay.
redevelopment or subdivision rules and regs.
We can move on. Bill. Hmm?
Move on.
Bills? No bills. No bills? Minutes of previous meetings? No minutes of previous meetings. Staff report.
I do have a couple things that I wanted to touch on quickly. So despite the holidays and me being on vacation, staff has been incredibly busy. And I do want to just point out that we did submit an application for the local rapid recovery planning program in relation to COVID-19. So we're hoping to get a favorable response from that, which will pair us up with a regional planning agency, presumably CMRPC, and we'll work to develop that recovery planning moving forward in terms of COVID-19 and the impacts to businesses, to residents, and to our kind of normal ways of life. We also submitted, and I should say DPW submitted the Shared Winter Streets program. They were looking at sidewalks in terms of Milford Road down by the Providence Road Cemetery. I think it was Fairview Cemetery. So extending there and then along Milford Road, there's also a couple of trailheads there. So some sidewalks there would be beneficial to the neighborhood and also hopefully connect some of those open space and other amenities along that way. We do think it may be a bit of a long shot in terms of the actual requirements of the shared Winter Streets program, but we're still hopeful that we can get some funding for that to move forward on that project. We also held our open space and recreation plan forum. Unfortunately, we had a very low turnout, but on the flip side, beneficial of that, we did reach back out to the state and they indicated that they're happy with us moving forward, as we had done significant amounts of outreach and just people were not going to show up around the holidays. So we are moving forward with that. There's still a few items to wrap up, but we are at the goal line, so to speak, of having our open space and recreation plan accepted. And it's been a long journey. So those are the main things that I wanted to touch on, but I'm happy to elaborate if needed.
How long before the next time it needs to be updated?
I believe
Now.
I have to look back. I believe they're valid for every 5 years. We may want to, in terms of those plans, I actually would prefer updating those and aligning them with the 2021 census. A lot of times they're like 5 years or 10 years. And when you align them with the census, you get a lot better and more robust data that comes out with those census releases. And so it kind of, if you can match those up with that cycle, I think it kind of streamlines things and helps us to get more benefits from those plans. But I believe it's 5 years that the OSRP is available, but I'll check back.
Okay. Anything else?
That's it for me.
That's it? Anything in correspondence? Any reports from planning board representatives on town committees and CMRPC?
Nothing since last meeting.
Chris said everything about open space and recreation plan.
Okay, I did notice, I think I noticed that we have one of our select persons now as the alternate sub-regional delegate to the CMMPO. The MPO is above CMRPC. So I sit there as chair of the commission of the CMRPC, and she's there and attended and participated in the most recent meeting, as a matter of fact, representing basically the Blackstone Valley communities. It's the first time I've seen that much of an activity from one of our select persons in something like this. The communities there's a process where the communities send representatives together to decide who should represent them. And I assume she managed to get in there.
Probably made the mistake of raising her hand.
Yeah, well, or made the mistake of showing up. The surest way to get into these things is to show up. Anybody else with anything? Hearing nothing, is there anything else which may lawfully come before us? If not, number 9.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded, not debatable. Dave,
Aye.
Justin,
Aye.
Linda,
Aye.
Bravo,
Aye.
and I vote aye.